Is Rolex losing its grip? Rolex dealerships spent years deciding who was worthy of buying a Rolex, and now that power is starting to slip. One customer did everything right, saved for months, walked in ready, knew exactly what he wanted, and was still told the watch wasn't for sale. Not today. Not for him. Unless he was willing to play the game. So he walked out and paid thousands over retail just to avoid the process entirely. And for a while, that system worked. Dealers had the leverage, the control, the final say. But now, cases are filling up, waitlists are shrinking, and some of those same dealerships are quietly losing access to the very brand that gave them that power in the first place. This isn't just a story about dealerships getting what they deserve. It's about what happens when a system built on control starts turning on itself, and why every part of it, from the buyers to the brand, is finally being forced to adjust. Now, let's get into it. The sign that aged badly. He was not the only one. Check into any watch forum between 2020 and 2023, and you would find thousands of versions of his story. The details changed, but the feeling did not. In 2020, COVID shut everything down. Stimulus money arrived, crypto boomed, and stock markets climbed. People who had never thought about watches in their lives suddenly decided a Submariner was a better place to park money than a savings account. Demand went somewhere beyond rational. Waitlists that used to run 6 months stretched to 2 years, then 3. Then some dealers stopped quoting a timeline at all. The gray market, the unauthorized resale world, went into a frenzy. A Submariner with a $9,000 retail price was selling for $17,000. A Daytona with a $15,000 retail price? $45,000 if you wanted one that week. Flippers made fortunes, influencers posed with watches they had bought purely to resell. The whole market started functioning less like a watch industry and more like a speculative asset class nobody had planned for. And in the middle of all that, some authorized dealers made a decision. They put a sign in the window. 2 words. Exhibition only. It meant, this watch exists in the world. You may look at it through the glass. Buying it is a separate conversation, and that conversation does not begin today. The sign was not entirely invented cruelty. Rolex genuinely could not produce enough steel sports models to meet what the market had become. The scarcity was real. But the way some dealers enforced it went well past inventory management and into something else. Something that felt, to the person on the other side of the counter, like being assessed and found wanting. Customers who had spent years building relationships with a store were told to spend more, prove your loyalty in dollars spent on things you did not want before the thing you actually came for becomes available to you. The man who saved for 8 months was not a flipper, nor was he a speculator. He was exactly the person a luxury brand is supposed to exist for. Someone who had attached meaning to the object, who had waited and saved and walked in with genuine intention. He got the exhibition-only speech. The dealers who ran those signs believed they were protecting exclusivity. What they were building, without realizing it, was a record. Every person turned away, bundled into a purchase they resented, made to feel unworthy of a watch they could afford. Every one of those people filed the experience somewhere. Not all of them forgave it when the market shifted. Exclusivity is a feeling you create in the customer. The moment you make them feel excluded instead, you have made something else entirely, something that does not wash off. That sign is mostly gone from the windows now. What it left behind is a different kind of problem. 80,000 watches going nowhere. Picture a safe. Not a dramatic vault, just a dealer safe, the kind in the back of a jewelry store. Inside it are watches that have not moved in 7 months. Gold cases. 2-tone dials. Diamond settings that caught the light beautifully in 2021, when someone was willing to buy them to get access to the steel model they actually wanted. Now, multiply that safe by hundreds. Estimates from early 2026 put the number of unsold Rolex units sitting at dealerships globally at somewhere around 80,000 pieces. The caveat is worth stating that the number is calculated, not officially confirmed, but the underlying reality it points to is not in dispute. Walk into dealer stock lists in early 2026, and you find Yachtmasters, Datejusts, gold day dates sitting at 6 months, 8 months, or longer. Not because nobody wants Rolex, but because the specific models that moved during the speculation years, the steel sports models, are moving again, and everything that got bundled alongside them to manufacture purchase history is not. This is the inventory trap, and it is one of the more elegant pieces of justice in this whole story. Here is the part that the dealers did not think through. During the peak years, some authorized dealers figured out a system. A customer wants a Daytona, the steel sports model everyone is chasing. The dealer says, "We can help with that. But first, take a look at this Yachtmaster, this diamond set Datejust, this gold model in the corner that has been sitting for 4 months. It was called bundling. Buy something we have plenty of, and your name moves up on the list for the thing you actually want." The customer, desperate enough, bought the bundle. They did not want it. They were not going to wear it, but they bought it because that was the toll. The system worked until the market stopped cooperating. In 2023, the speculative bubble broke quietly. Crypto corrected, and interest rates climbed. Inflation squeezed the kind of discretionary spending that turns watches into investment vehicles. The people who had been buying Rolexes as assets looked at their portfolios and made different calculations. The Submariner that hit $20,000 on the gray market in 2022 was back down to $14,000 by late 2024. The Daytona that was going for $45,000? Moving closer to $25,000. The gray market cooled. The waitlists have shortened, and the customers who had been bundled into purchases they never wanted started listing those watches on resale groups. Not to make money. Most of them were not making money. A diamond Yachtmaster that retailed for $30,000 was appearing on the gray market for around $21,000. A 30% loss for whoever was holding it. They were listing it because they did not want it in their house. Because every time they looked at it, they remembered the transaction that produced it, the toll they paid to get the watch they actually wanted. Hundreds of those watches hitting the secondary market at 30% below. Retail does something to the price of the watches still sitting in dealer safes. The dealers who built the bundling system spent years filling their customers' hands with watches that those customers resented. The watches in those safes are not going to zero. Rolex holds value better than almost anything else in the watch world, but they are also not going anywhere fast. And every month they sit there, they represent a purchasing decision that made sense in 2022 and makes considerably less sense now. The dealers who made their customers take the bundle are now sitting on the bundle themselves. Sitting on inventory is painful. What Rolex did next made the pain structural. The flip that came back around. There is something the watch community suspected for years that nobody inside the industry wanted to say clearly. Some authorized dealers were not selling hot Rolex models to customers. They were selling them to gray market resellers. Directly, quietly, at a markup over retail, off the books. Not every dealer, probably not even most. But enough that the pattern became visible in secondary market pricing, in the specific ways certain dealerships always seemed to have nothing available for walk-in customers. While the gray market never ran completely dry, reports suggested some dealers in high-volume markets were diverting significant portions of their most desirable allocations, not to waiting customers. To flippers who would hand the watches straight to gray market operations for a split of the premium. The customer was not even part of the equation. They were the cover story, the reason the dealership looked legitimate, while the real business happened somewhere else entirely. Now, think about what that actually meant for the person on the other side of the counter. You spend months building a relationship with a dealership. You buy the bracelet, you buy the fashion watch, you sit on the wait list. You call back every few weeks, politely, because you were told to stay in touch. You are told nothing is available. Meanwhile, the Submariner you have been waiting for leaves through the back, wrapped and ready, heading to an operation that will list it online for 30% over retail within the week. You were never on the list. You were on a list. The real list had different names on it, and none of them had spent 8 months saving. The gray market during those years was not just tolerated in certain locations. It was being fed from inside the authorized system. And it worked brilliantly, right up until the secondary market stopped rising. The gray market needed one thing to keep functioning: prices that kept climbing. The moment they stopped, the whole arrangement became expensive. Dealers had diverted inventory for a cut of a premium that no longer existed. The gray market contacts stopped buying. The flippers disappeared almost overnight. People who had been treating steel sports watches like cryptocurrency quietly moved on to the next thing, leaving dealers with relationships they had cultivated for years that were now worth exactly nothing. And the customers those dealers had failed were still there, with longer memories than anyone anticipated. Some problems are moral. This one also had a price tag, and it came due at the same time as everything else. The gray market corrected. The regulators noticed something different, and what they found had been hiding in dealer contracts for over a decade. The fine. In December 2023, France handed Rolex a bill. 91.6 million euros, roughly $100 million, for something Rolex had been doing for more than 10 years without anyone stopping them. The violation was almost elegant in its simplicity. Rolex had written into its dealer contracts, explicitly, in black and white, that authorized dealers were not permitted to sell watches online. No e-commerce, no website listings, and no digital sales channel of any kind. For over a decade, that clause held. Dealers who might have wanted to build an online presence, reach customers in smaller markets, and diversify their revenue beyond foot traffic could not, because Rolex said so. France's competition regulator looked at that clause and called it what it was. Not a quality protection measure, not an anti-counterfeiting tool, a restriction of trade. A manufacturer is using contract language to close an entire sales channel across its dealer network, to its own benefit and everyone else's detriment. Rolex acknowledged the letters existed. The regulator published them. The fine was confirmed. What made the ruling sting in a particular way was a detail Rolex had no good answer for. At the same time, it was telling independent dealers they could not sell new watches online. Rolex had already built an online channel for pre-owned watches through Boucherer, which it would acquire in 2023. The regulator noted this. Politely and completely devastatingly. If online sales were genuinely incompatible with brand protection, the question was why Rolex had built an online program for itself. Rolex paid the fine. A brand doing over 10 billion Swiss francs a year in annual revenue absorbs $100 million. The money was not the wound. The wound was the document. An official, published, regulatory finding that for over a decade, Rolex had been operating its dealer contracts in ways that were not legal. That is not an opinion on a watch forum. That is a government decision with a reference number. For the dealers inside that system, they had been following rules that turned out to be illegal. They had told customers they could not buy online because Rolex said so. They had surrendered a revenue channel because Rolex said so. They had made their businesses smaller and less flexible than they could have been because Rolex said so. The regulator's answer to all of that was that Rolex should not have said so. Nobody in that story comes out looking good, but only one of them paid the bill. The regulator landed a punch. What Rolex did next was not a response to the fine. It had been planned long before anyone in Paris started looking at the contracts. Rolex buys the room. In August 2023, the watch industry woke up to news it had not seen coming. Rolex had acquired Boucherer, not partnered with, not taken a minority stake in, acquired outright. As in, Rolex, the brand that had spent its entire existence selling through independent dealers, that had built a 100-year distribution model on the premise that retailers were partners, now owned the world's largest Rolex retailer. Boucherer was not a small operation. Over 100 retail locations across Europe and the United States. A history stretching back to 1888. A relationship with Rolex dating to 1924, 19 years after Rolex was founded. For a century, the two companies had grown alongside each other. Jörg Boucherer, the third-generation owner who ran the company until 2023, was reportedly the last living person who had personally known and worked with Hans Wilsdorf, Rolex's founder. When Jörg decided, at 87, that it was time to sell, Rolex stepped in. The purchase price was never disclosed. Industry estimates placed it in the billions. What Rolex received for that money was something it had never held before: direct control over a significant portion of its own retail distribution. Before the acquisition, 92% of Rolex sales moved through independent authorized dealers. Rolex could set retail prices and allocate inventory, but what happened between the dealer and the customer was not Rolex's to control. Now, across more than 100 Boucherer and Tourneau locations, Rolex controls the staffing, the displays, the service model, and the customer interaction from the moment someone walks through the door. It also controls something more valuable than any of that: the inventory allocation to its own stores versus its independent partners. The Bucherer deal also came with a passenger nobody wanted. Karl F. Bucherer, the watch brand the family had poured around 250 million Swiss francs into over decades, was Jörg Bucherer's personal passion project. Well made in certain respects, genuinely appreciated by a small community of enthusiasts, and unprofitable for most of its existence. Jörg kept it alive because it was his, and because, as long as he owned the company, the decision was his to make. 3 months after the acquisition closed, Jörg Bucherer passed away. He was 87. Rolex looked at the books. On the 7th of February, 2025, approximately 100 Karl F. Bucherer employees were called into meetings and told the brand was being shut down, not restructured, not sold, discontinued. The website went dark. Production stopped at the Lengnau facility. Pre-owned Karl F. Bucherer watches now trade at discounts of up to 90%. A watch that retailed for $15,000 was selling for $1,500 on the secondary market. The brand had been bundled with Daytona allocations, used as a purchase tool, the same way dealers had used their own inventory to extract spend from customers, and still could not generate profit. Even the most desirable watch in the world was not enough to make people want it. There is a bitter symmetry in that. The bundling that dealers used on customers, Bucherer tried on Karl F. Bucherer. It did not work for the customers. It did not work for the brand either. The Bucherer acquisition was not a sentimental move. It was Rolex deciding it wanted to own the room, the retail room, the pre-owned market, the customer relationship from first purchase through resale. Independent dealers watching it happen understood what it signaled about their position in the chain going forward. Rolex bought Bucherer. Then, Rolex started sending termination letters. The letters. Amy Hart and her husband Brad had been Rolex authorized dealers since 1977. 46 years. Their store, Hauser's Jewelers in Newport News, Virginia, had built its identity around the brand across nearly 5 decades of American retail history, through recessions, through the quartz crisis that nearly killed the Swiss watch industry, through every market cycle Rolex had navigated. The relationship was not a contract, it was a history. The week after Christmas in a recent year, Brad and Amy took a vacation. Rolex sales had been excellent, they were proud. 2 weeks after they got back, a letter arrived. Authorization terminated. No specific violation cited. No warning, no conversation about what could be improved or what the problem was. 46 years. A letter. It was a gut punch, Brad told nationaljeweler.com. Rolex had told them it was an honor to be in a family business like theirs. Then the letter arrived. The nearest Rolex dealer from their location is now over an hour away. Natasha Henderson ran Saxon's Fine Jewelers in Bend, Oregon. She had not cut corners. The store was impeccably run. She had been in active discussions with her Rolex representative about a planned renovation, an upgrade to the Rolex section specifically, done right, done to the brand's standards. In February, she attended a Rolex training event. In April, she received an email from a private server with no official Rolex letterhead telling her the authorization was ending. She thought it was a fraudulent attempt. She called Rolex to verify. It was not a scam. "I'm a small store," she said. "What they did almost put me out of business." In Stuttgart, a jeweler who had carried Rolex for 50 years, 3 generations of family ownership, half a century of representing the brand in the same city, lost their authorization in 2025. The owner said that losing the Rolex was the decision that forced the business to close entirely. No warnings, no rule violations. Just the end of the relationship, delivered without explanation. Across Germany alone, approximately 40 authorized dealer locations will lose Rolex authorization by the end of 2026. Dozens of family jewelers in the United States have closed in recent years. Significant consolidation in the UK has been running since 2012. Industry analysts estimate Rolex has terminated or not renewed 10 to 15% of its global authorized dealer network since 2020. The reason, when one industry consultant finally named it plainly, was not behavior, not rule violations, not gray market diversion. It was geography. The historical justifications that drove previous separations, not following rules, misrepresenting the brand, creative pricing, transshipping, have given way to something decidedly less tangible, less actionable, and that appears, to the untrained eye, to be your store's address, where you are located, whether the postcode is prestigious enough for the brand Rolex is building next. That is the part that makes the whole narrative complicated. Because the dealers who ran exhibition-only signs as sport, who bundled customers into purchases they resented, who quietly fed gray market operations, many of them were in cities valuable enough to survive the cull. The people losing their Rolex in many of the documented cases are Brad, Amy, and Natasha, the man in Stuttgart whose grandfather signed the original contract. People who did exactly what the brand asked of them, for decades, in the wrong location. The man who saved for 8 months and was turned away by a dealer still carrying the brand? The dealer who turned her away may still have the authorization. The dealer in the next town who would have sold her the watch with a handshake and a smile? Gone. The letters went out to the people who deserved them least. What opened in their place is something else entirely, and it tells you exactly where Rolex thinks this is going. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long-term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. The future Rolex is building, and who it is not built for. On the 13th of March, 2025, Rolex opened a 4-story flagship boutique on Old Bond Street in London. 4 floors, dedicated entirely to Rolex. Every model line has its own section, private consultation rooms, and in-house service. The kind of retail environment where nothing happens accidentally, where every surface and every interaction has been considered, controlled, and aligned with a very specific idea of what owning a Rolex should feel like. It is genuinely impressive. Walk through it, and you understand immediately what Rolex is building. A retail experience that makes the brand feel like an institution, not a transaction. Here is what it costs. As watch commentator Roman Scharf noted at the time, several Rolex retailers may have to close their Rolex sections because of that single boutique. Inventory is not unlimited. Every Submariner that goes to Old Bond Street is a Submariner that does not go to an authorized dealer somewhere else. The flagship does not exist alongside the old network in equal terms. It operates, to a meaningful degree, at the old network's expense. Rolex is building its largest flagship in the Western world on 5th Avenue in Manhattan, opening expected in 2027. Multiple floors, exclusive models, an experience designed so that buying a Rolex in New York becomes an event, something you remember, something you describe to people afterward. In November 2025, at Dubai Watch Week, Rolex CEO Jean-Frédéric Dufour gave one of his rare public addresses. Rolex CEOs do not speak often. When they do, the industry listens carefully. He said Rolex has no intention of expanding its own retail network significantly beyond what came with the Bucherer acquisition. The wholesale model, selling through independent authorized dealers, will remain the primary distribution channel. 92% of Rolex sales still move through partners. But he also said something worth sitting with. He pointed to the automotive sector as a warning. Car companies went digital, pushed direct sales, and weakened dealer relationships. The result was customers who became less loyal, brands that became interchangeable. An industry without long-term client relationships is an industry at risk, he said. Rolex values the personal relationship, the local dealer who knows your family, who calls when your watch is ready, who services it for decades. He said all of that. While the letters were going out to Brad Hart, to Natasha Henderson, to the family in Stuttgart, there is no clean way to reconcile those two things. Either long-term relationships matter, or they do not. Either the local dealer who has known your customers for 50 years is valuable, or they are a postcode problem. Dufour spoke about one thing. The termination letters described another. What Rolex is building is not a mystery. The large premium dealers, Watches of Switzerland Group, and Siddiqui Holding, are winning harder than before. UK Rolex turnover for Watches of Switzerland rose from £595 million in 2017 to £859 million in 2024. The flagship boutiques are extraordinary. The certified pre-owned program gives buyers a legitimate alternative to gray market uncertainty. The Boucherer network provides a level of retail control that makes the customer experience more consistent. The brand is not in trouble, it is not collapsing. Rolex is executing a decade-long strategy with the kind of patience and capital that most companies never access. The losers are specific and human. Small family jewelers are losing their authorization with no clear explanation, often closing businesses that took generations to build. Customers in secondary markets who now drive an hour each way for a service appointment. The watch was bought as a toll, sitting in a resale group for 30% less than it cost, owned by someone who never wanted it and cannot quite bring themselves to feel neutral about it. And the dealers who behaved badly during the peak years? The ones who ran the exhibition-only signs as sport, who bundled customers into purchases they resented, who fed inventory to gray market flippers. Some of them are still in the network, still authorized. Still sitting on safes full of gold yacht masters that are not moving, in cities prestigious enough that Rolex has not yet sent the letter. They got what they deserved more quietly. They got to watch the market correct. They got to watch Rolex take control. They got to keep their authorization while the inventory they accumulated through years of forcing customers to spend. Those diamonds, those two-tone dials, those watches nobody asked for, sits in the back, going nowhere. The man who saved for 8 months eventually found a different dealer, bought the watch he wanted, wears it. It means to him exactly what he thought it would. The dealer who turned him away is still making calls. Some of the names on the list pick up, some of them do not. That is not justice, it is just what happened. Here is what none of the headlines quite say directly. Rolex is not dying. That is not what this is. What this is, when you step back far enough to see the whole shape of it, is a brand that spent 3 years watching its own distribution network become a PR disaster, and then used the market correction as the opening to restructure everything it had wanted to restructure for years. The pandemic bubble was not just chaos. For Rolex, it was information. It showed them exactly which parts of the system were working against them. The dealers who abused the access they had been given, the bundling, the gray market diversion, the exhibition-only performance, handed Rolex the justification to do what it was already inclined to do. Consolidate, control, and cut. The dealers who did none of that got caught in the same consolidation. Because the strategy was never about punishment. It was about the future Rolex wanted to build, and which addresses fit inside it. And the brand that benefited from both of them for decades is opening a 4-story boutique on one of the most expensive streets in the world. Make of that what you will. If you found this worth watching, like the video and subscribe. We cover the luxury watch world every week, and there is a lot more coming. See you in the next one.